Perfect.
All right, so for you guys that are on Zoom, make sure you put your name in the chat box. I only need the license once, so if you did it last week, I don't need your license number again. I mean, you're welcome to put it if you want, but same with for you guys signing in. Actually, I know you guys already put it in, but the rest of the time you don't need to. I only need it at least once. So anyway, and then Dylan, just a reminder: if in order for me to give you CE credit, your camera has to be on. So anyway, hopefully you can turn the camera on. You'll have it shortly. Perfect. Okay. All right. So I'm going to let me share my screen here. We're just going to kind of do the same type of thing that you guys did last week with Jason on this, going through it. Just get everything arranged on my computer here so that I can see good. Here's Gabe.
What's up?
I just didn't know if you were really going to come when you said it. Because you weren't very confident.
Yeah, I was like, I think I'll probably be there.
Okay, so let me make sure we got this as big as we can get it on here so you guys can see it. Why is he taking me down here? Okay, I think we're ready to roll now. Did you grab one of these, Gabe?
No, I did not.
Thank you. Perfect. And I'm assuming probably easier to see with the lights off.
Yeah.
So, and then for you guys that are on Zoom, I know a couple of you joined, make sure you throw in the chat box your first and last name. If you have already put your license number before, I don't need to have it again. I only need at least one of the classes. Although I'll take it, it makes my life easier. So anyway, thanks for being here. And just a reminder for you guys on Zoom as well, I think everybody's good, but just have to, in order for me to give you the CE credit, your camera has to stay on. So, all right, I think everybody in here has a packet. And so what we're gonna do is basically go through and talk about all of these changes and things that we're having to deal with, but also just like, okay, when you get a buyer, what's the paperwork you gotta use to fill out to make them your client, and that the company requires that you have, and all that fun stuff. So you guys look like you're very excited.
I'm so hyped right now.
Okay, good. Well, I'll try to make it as interesting as we can whenever you're going through forms, but I do have to share with you, those that may have heard me talk, maybe none of you guys even heard this. Were any of you around last week when I talked about that we had a hearing that we were gonna be going to at the Salt Lake Board? Oh, well then never mind. I'm not gonna tell you guys then. We won. I just got the notice, right as we were starting class, I got the notice.
What was it for?
So,
Was it the people who were going back through our
No.
history or something?
No. So what happened was, and since we won, I'll even tell you who it was, because I don't think he'll care, but Aubrey Kelly, if you know who Aubrey is.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, so Aubrey had a deal that he had put under contract. He had the buyer, put a property under contract. Then, and they actually made the earnest money to be non-refundable, except for if the property didn't appraise for the purchase price, then the buyers would get their earnest money back. Well, once the appraisal was done, the lender, I think, called the buyers and told them, hey, the appraisal came in, we're good. So the buyer texted Aubrey, said, hey, we're good on the appraisal. And after that, Aubrey then texted the listing agent and said, hey, appraisal's in, we're good. Well, then he talked to the lender, and the lender said, yes, the appraisal's good, except for there was some concern on the foundation, and so he wants a structural engineer to go out and look at the foundation to make sure that it's structurally sound. The structural engineer goes out, looks at the property, and says that it doesn't look like there's any movement new that's taking place, but that they would recommend that you fill the hole or the crack that was in the foundation. So they then go back to the sellers and say, hey, we need you to fill the crack in the foundation. And the sellers say, basically, no, we don't want to do that. And anyway, they basically get a copy of the structural engineer's report. They start to talk about the structural engineer's report. Well, on the structural engineer's report, it did say it doesn't have to be done now, but it should be done later. So the seller says, well, the structural engineer didn't say it has to be done now, but it should be done later. Well, anyway, this becomes this big back and forth kind of a thing, and finally, the buyers were just like, why won't, like, this is like $500 to fix, why won't they just fix it? And so they finally just said, you know what, we're gonna just cancel the contract. And they had sent to the appraiser, asking the appraiser, hey, the structural engineer said it doesn't have to be done now or whatever, but the appraiser said, well, as soon as the repair's done, get a copy of the invoice to the underwriter. The underwriter will then either have me go out to verify it, or they may just say that's good enough. Well, the underwriter wouldn't sign off on it without the repair being done. So, would you say then that it appraised or didn't appraise?
It's in the brace.
Yeah, so the listing agent is saying it appraised for the value, which is what the addendum said that the earnest money would be non-refundable for, but I'm saying as the principal broker, if without the repair done, they were denied the loan because it didn't appraise. So for me, I'm like, we release the earnest money to the buyer. And so the agent, I showed up to the office one day and he was the listing agent who's also the principal broker of his brokerage, it's a one-man shop. I show up to the office and he's sitting in our lobby waiting for me. I get here and he's like, I need to talk to you. And I was like, okay. He comes in, he tells me everything and says, I think I'm entitled to the earnest money, or the seller is entitled to the earnest money. And I said, I don't think you are. And well, actually, truth is, at that point, I didn't know enough about the whole scenario. I just said, let me see what I can find out. Once I talked to Aubrey, then I was like, yeah, I don't believe that it didn't appraise. Because if it appraised, then we could have closed and
It would've been
everything did.
signed on.
Yeah. So anyway, he then the listing agent sends to me and to Aubrey an email saying, if you don't release the $2,000 earnest money to my seller, then I'm gonna file an ethics complaint against Aubrey, and proceeds to say this is why he thought that he had violated our code of ethics, which I was like, yeah, those aren't violations of the code of ethics, but whatever. So he files the complaint because I said I'm not returning the earnest money to the seller, or I'm not gonna give it to the seller. So we then, he files the complaint. Aubrey has to write a response. He writes a response, and then the funny thing is, based on his response, the agent emails and says, either apologize for what you said in your response, or I'm gonna file another complaint against you. And we just ignored it at that point because we're like, this is just stupid. So he did file another complaint, which when that got to the board, the lady who oversees it called him and said, this is
What is
stupid.
happening?
Like, yeah, what are you doing? So anyway, we finally had, last Tuesday, we had the hearing that we showed up for and presented our side of the case. And anyway, here's the sad thing is, and I knew this was gonna happen. I don't even know why I'm going into all this. This has nothing to do with the class, but it's probably more interesting than what we're gonna talk about, so. I don't know, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so,
It's good learning experience.
yes, good learning. So we go to the hearing, and I was concerned that what was gonna happen at this hearing was that it was gonna turn into, should have I given the earnest money back to the buyer, or should I give it to the seller? But that's not, the purpose of the hearing is, did he violate the code of ethics? So anyway, we presented our side, and when the panel can ask whatever questions they want, and so then they turned to me and said, what did you do with the earnest money? Which I knew this is what was gonna happen, and I was like, it doesn't matter what I did with the earnest money, that has nothing to do with if Aubrey violated the code of ethics. And they said, yeah, but what did you do with the earnest money? And I said, I did not return it to the seller. Well, what did you do with it? And I said, I did not return it to the seller is what I did with it. And they were like, yeah, but what did you do with it? And there's an attorney for the board that's always there. So I turned to him and I said, do I have to answer this question? Because it's not relevant to what we're here for. And he's like, you can answer it however you want to answer it. So I said, we didn't give it back to the seller. And anyway, so I was a little worried though, because I thought maybe I ticked them off by not answering their question, that might hurt Aubrey's case, but it didn't. They said he was not in violation of the code of ethics, so we won. So anyway, kind of exciting, but anyway.
Do people get like reported for violating code of ethics a lot, even if they didn't violate any?
So yeah, good question, which is a whole separate class, but I'll give you the short answer.
Yeah.
Is the way the process works is there's first a grievance committee. So there's a committee of agents, which Ruby is on it and Jason are on the grievance committee. I have been on the past, but I'm not right now. That if somebody files a complaint, whether it's the public or an agent, that committee reads through the complaint and then it looks at it and says, if this really happened, so they have to just assume it did. If this really happened, would that be a violation of the code of ethics? And then if they read through it and go, no, this doesn't look like a violation of the code of ethics, then they just say no. And so if somebody did file a complaint against you and the grievance committee said it wasn't a violation, you would never even know somebody filed a complaint against you.
Oh, wow.
You only find out about it if the committee looks at it and says, if what this person says is true, would it be a violation? Yes, then you would hear about it.
So they didn't report just like random stuff, they actually said stuff that Aubrey could have done, but he didn't do it?
So,
They reported exactly what happened, and in their mind, it was a violation.
Okay.
yeah, they're saying,
But what I'm saying is like, this report that was for Aubrey got past the grievance committee and
Yes.
went to.
to the professional standards, which I'm on the professional standards as well, even though
Oh.
last week I was there.
Because you have to remember, there's two sides to a story.
Yeah.
So even like how I would say something in their mind, how they worded it could come across as a code of ethic violation. And when they
Correct.
see that, they have to go based on like, if this happened in this way, then it would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like, you have to remember like, there's two sides, and that's why you get the chance to defend your side to the like to them at that point.
Yeah, and I'll give you like an example is one of the things they said he did that was a violation of the code of ethics was that he lied. Because he texted the listing agent saying, we're good on the appraisal, and then they really weren't good on the appraisal. So they were
Because
saying
he didn't
that's,
have all the information. So
Yeah.
in his mind,
and that's just it. When he said, we're good, they were good.
Uh-huh.
Meaning that was his, to the best of his knowledge, it was good. And then when he found out more later, he did pass it on. The other thing they said that he did to violate the code of ethics was that he told the agent that the clients were thinking about canceling the contract and that they were maybe gonna cancel the contract. But when he said that, the clients had already actually signed the cancellation. And so he was saying, well, he lied again because he said they were thinking about it, but they had already signed the cancellation. And all we had to do is show up, and he actually even had the client write a letter that said, we had signed it, but we weren't sure we were gonna actually cancel it. We just had it signed and ready in case we decided to.
Yeah.
And so we asked him not to send it. So that's where,
loyalty versus
yeah, just, it was kind of like, you have a fiduciary duty to obey your client. And if your client says, don't send it yet, even though we've signed it, okay, then I'm not gonna sign it.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, back to what Carrie was saying, it could look like, oh yeah, he lied because he said they were gonna cancel even though they were already had it canceled. But without all the information to say, yeah, my client signed it, but they also said, don't send it yet. So
Yeah.
there's a reason that we have like notices have to be signed in writing, signed by the party giving notice and received. So until that happens,
until it's received, it's not canceled.
it's not really
Yeah.
canceled.
So he wasn't lying, it just hadn't been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was,
Have you taken the 60-day class at the Board of Realtors?
Oh, yeah,
Because they
he
talked
has.
a lot about this whole
He doesn't
meeting?
remember, but he has.
Okay, I was like,
Yeah.
that they talked about, I was like, I mean, it was 3 months ago for me, but I'm like, they talked all about the grievance committee.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just because I was like, okay.
Yeah, no, it is a cool, fun thing to be on, and I think it's a good thing, but anyway.
That's awesome.
So we won, it's the good news. Alright, so, we're gonna jump into this now then, so I apologize that I went on that tangent there, but figured it was kind of interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're gonna talk about the buyer packet. So this is all the paperwork you need when you're working with a buyer, and the cool thing, whatever, maybe it's cool, not cool, but is we have a brand new updated form that was just released this week. The one that I've got here shows sample, but it now is available and ready to be used. I submitted this morning to Dotloop to have them go through and get all of the fields and stuff marked and put in there so that we can put these into Dotloop. So they probably won't be in Dotloop. Well, I don't know how long it's gonna take Dotloop to get the documents prepared, put all the fields in. But hopefully by next Wednesday, when we have to start all the changes and stuff, they will be available. I would guess the only thing that potentially could get in the way of that is probably every brokerage that uses Dotloop is sending new forms to Dotloop this week to update. So we'll see. But even if we continue using the ones we have, we're fine, because I actually modified those to meet the new standard as of June 3rd. So anytime you've used any of our forms since June 3rd, you've been fine for really going forward. But Jason and I have talked about it and have decided that, and I think he probably explained this to you guys last week, but just in case, or in case somebody wasn't there, I'm gonna say it again. Which I think I saw a couple more people join on Zoom. So if you're on Zoom and you haven't heard me say this yet, make sure you put your first and last name in there. And if you want CE credit, your camera has to be on. So anyway, so Jason and I have talked about it, and we have decided that at least for the time being, we are just gonna use these Utah Association of Realtor forms. So for our listing agreement and the buyer broker, we're just gonna use those within the company. We may down the road modify them and create our own again that's on our own letterhead and things, but the reason for that, if Jason didn't explain it, but it used to be that our forms were more advanced. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but we had things built in on ours that were better than what the one that UAR had created had. But the two principal brokers before me were both on the forms committee, and over the last 5 to 10 years, they have slowly gotten these forms to be modified to match really what we already had. So over time, these ones have become more like ours. Now, granted, with that being said, there are some major changes that just took place. And so anyway, we have just decided for the time being, we're gonna continue with using, we're gonna use the ones that UAR Forms Committee created. So that's what we're gonna go over today. Okay, so what we're gonna do is just go through this, and I'm gonna take you guys through this the way that I would do it if I was sitting down with a client, is kind of how I like to do it. Now granted, we'll talk way more detail than I probably would if I was really sitting down with the client, but I'm gonna show you kind of the process that I go through, because when I sit down with a client, I always approach them signing the forms by telling them that either they can just read the whole thing themselves if they want to, that they can just sign it if they want to, or that I could go through and explain to them what the form says before they sign it. And then I say, which would you prefer? And what would you guess that most of the time people prefer?
Explain
Yeah,
it.
just explain it. Just tell me what I'm signing. So that's kind of how I'm gonna take you guys through this. So the first thing though that I always wanna point out to you guys to make sure that you see and understand is this is a legally binding agreement. Now, it used to be, the last time I taught this class, the way I always taught this before today, the way I always taught this was last week you guys went through the listing agreement. And in the past, I would have always said, the listing agreement is a legally binding contract, this is a legally binding contract, but this one in the past has not been as enforced as the listing agreement has been. Meaning, even though, yes, it is a legally binding contract, most brokerages don't end up suing their clients. So it's, even though it says it's a binding contract, it's very rarely that it has gone to court over that contract. Now, with that being said, I think we will see it more times be used now by brokerages because of the fact that in the past, it was kind of like the seller, the listing brokerage was the one who paid our brokerage the commission, and so it was kind of like, whatever, like, we weren't taking our clients to court, and hopefully we still don't, but we weren't taking our clients to court to get paid because typically the listing brokerage was the one that was always paying us. Well, now with these changes that are taking place next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, is when they're going into effect for us. Technically, it's the 17th is when it has to be in effect, but as of next Wednesday is when commissions are, buyer agent or buyer broker commissions are coming off of the MLS. So because of that, going forward, really the client now is gonna be responsible to pay us, and I don't know how that's gonna play out. Like, it's gonna be interesting to see how this all works, because it's in a market like we had during COVID, and really, quite honestly, with interest rates now dropping down a little bit and hopefully going to continue to come down, we're gonna see more and more buyers come off of the sidelines. And then the more buyers that come off the sidelines, the more competition there's gonna be. The more competition there's gonna be is really when you're working with a seller and you get offers in, it's really gonna be a matter of looking at how much is the seller gonna net on this to decide which offer's the best, and not always will the highest purchase price net the seller the most amount of money. And so it's gonna play out it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But that actually just means all the more, this is the whole point of the lawsuit, is they want more transparency. They want us having to talk to our clients more about, when you're on the buyer side, the commissions and things. So just keep in mind, this is a legally binding agreement. And so in the event, even though I just said to you guys, I always give them 3 choices, they can read it themselves, I can explain it to them, or they can just sign. Which, by the way, signing a contract, using the excuse of, I didn't read it, I just signed it, it doesn't work. The assumption is in the state of Utah is, if you've signed a contract, not only did you read it, but that you understood it. So you can't say, well, I didn't understand what it meant. Well, that's part of the idea of why they put this up here at the top of this is a legally binding agreement, is because we want to be able to say, if you ended up in court and somebody tried to say, well, they sent it to me through Dotloop and I just clicked, I didn't really read it. It's like, well, it was a legally binding agreement. So with that being said, if your clients do want to talk to an attorney or have them look at it, they can. Okay, just make sure that you're aware of that. And now, when that happens, we always get it back. We got one the other day back that an attorney, the buyer happened to be the attorney, but he crossed out so much stuff and was like, I'm not agreeing to this and that. And then we as a brokerage, I have to decide, are we willing to do the transaction with him crossing all this stuff out? So anyway, it is a legally binding agreement, okay? Next. So the next piece of this is that it says it's between the company, which you'll put Century 21 Everest in there, and your name as the authorized agent, and blank for the buyer. Now, obviously, you're gonna put the buyer's name in there, but how do you know what to put in there for the buyer's name? Like, do we just ask them, what's your name, or how do we, and part of what I'm asking is, when you're working with a seller, you can go to the tax records and say, okay, who is on title that we can put in here? So how do I know what to put for the buyer on here?
Is this a trick question?
Nope.
Because normally you'd probably check you need a legal name. So I don't know, I'd ask who's purchasing the house.
Okay, good. So that's the first good question, is so who's gonna be purchasing the house? That's a great question.
Because who's gonna be on the loan.
Correct. Yeah, so if there is a loan, we need that, good. So here's how I like to do this, is I always like to find out, so first is who's gonna be purchasing, and are you gonna pay cash or get a loan? If they're getting a loan, then the most important thing on this is how did you apply for the loan? What's the name you used to apply for the loan? Because you want the name that is gonna be on the real estate purchase contract, and because we typically use .loop to fill those out along with this buyer broker agreement, it should match. So however they're applying for the loan. So for me, if they have already gone and applied for the loan and they have a pre-approval letter and they can give you the pre-approval letter, you'll have the names right on there, which would be great. But if not, just find out who's gonna be purchasing, who's gonna be, and really ultimately who's gonna be on the loan if there is gonna be a loan. And if there is, what is the name they applied for it in? So for example, everybody calls me Russ, but my name's really Russell. If I was applying for a loan, it would be under Russell, not Russ. So you would want to make sure filling this out that you had Russell as my name, not Russ. Make sense? So that's the idea of this. So that's what you want to do for the buyer. Okay, next, term of the agreement. So the next piece of this is, and again, which actually, let me pause for one sec. One of the things that I do want to tell you guys, if you have never read through this, which high likelihood this new one, you have never read through it. My recommendation is, especially for you guys that are newer agents, my recommendation, but even seasoned agents, read through this new contract. And for the newer agents, I like to say read through it with either a pen in your hand or a highlighter. Read through it, and if there's something you don't understand or you're not sure about, highlight it and or make a note about it, and then contact me or Jason or Ruby, just one of the brokers, and talk to us about, okay, hey, here's some questions, I don't think I understood this or that, because you should at least have read this one time, especially when I'm just now telling you, the assumption is your client, once they sign it, that they have read it and they understood it. Well, guess what? You're gonna be signing this on behalf of the brokerage, so the understanding is you've read it and that you understand it. So I would recommend that you should have read it, and you hopefully should understand it because you will then have read it, okay? All right, so terms of the agreement. So the duration of the agreement is going to be whatever date that this is signed is when it will start, and then the end date is gonna be 5 p.m. Mountain Time on whatever date you put in there. So what should we put in there for the date?
Like 4 months, 6 months.
You kind of cut out
4
there.
to 6 months, I think
Oh.
is what I said.
4 to 6 months, is that what you said?
Oh wait, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about listing.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Hmm.
Any other thoughts? Anyone else?
3 months.
Okay. So here's what I will tell you. For me, there typically, like what Hal said, on the listing side, usually for me personally, I want it to be between 4 and 6 months. And for me, the way I decide that is based on, do I think it's gonna sell quickly? I'm gonna do it 4 months. If I'm like, they're gonna overprice it, might take a little bit longer, I might want 6. You could do 8, 9, 12, whatever.
Jason also said depending on the weather, like,
Yeah, that could play into it
like
too.
right now, depending if you have a house in the canyon, right, and it's gonna snow in 3 months, 4
Yeah.
months.
Perfect.
You might want to
Yes.
extend it longer for a listing agent.
Correct. So now on the buyer broker though, which is what we're talking about today, for me, here's how I do it. I like to find out from the client, when are you planning, when do you need to be into a home? And hopefully there's something that they're like, we have to be on by a certain date. And the reason I say hopefully is because a motivated client is
But
the best thing you can have, right? Because if they're like, we have to move by this date, or we got a job transfer, and I gotta start work by this date. So I like to start with, when do you need to be into a property? And then that's how I'm gonna decide what I'm gonna put the end date on, is based on that. If they say to me, we gotta be in the next 2 months, then I might only put it as 3. I might put it as 4, but something like that. If they said, oh, we just gotta find something in the next 6 months, well then I might put 8 months as the term of that. Now, with that being said though, we also now have this new requirement a rule, I should say, that because of the settlement, that you won't show properties without first getting an agreement signed. So it is also gonna be possible that you may end up doing this, and the duration of it might be today. Like, it's only good for today. So just recognize you could do that. It might be that you say, let's do it for a week. So for me, there are other brokerages and even other boards that have created a showing agreement, and we probably will end up with one, even though I personally don't really want us to have one, but I think we probably will end up with it. And the reason I say we probably will end up with it is I think you, agents, some of the agents are gonna want it because you're afraid to do this, which.
Don't be afraid to do it.
Yeah, just don't be afraid to do it. Because, and here's why I say don't be afraid to do it, is let's just do real quick. Let's say that Gabe says he wants to go see a house. We get there to see the house and I'm like, okay, because of the lawsuit that happened, we are required now to have an agreement signed before, and maybe I even say this over the phone before I go out there, but we're gonna be required to have an agreement signed before showing you the property. So when we get there, I'm gonna have to have you sign a document, or I could send it to you right now through Dotloop if you want, but I need you to sign this document that I would be representing you as your agent if you end up buying that house. Is that gonna be okay? So what if he says, well, I don't even know you. So, what if he's hesitant? Like, I don't even know you. That's where for me, then I would say, okay, well then let's do this. Since we have to do it, let's sign it for just a week. And basically what that means is any properties that I show you during that week, if you decide to buy one of those, I would end up being your agent. Is that gonna be okay? Let's say he says, well, I don't know, I'm not even sure I wanna do that. Then is when I might go, okay, well, what about if we just did it for the day? Any properties that I show you on Thursday, if you end up buying them. Like, should he have a problem with that? And if he does, what's the problem?
That's on him, and you should not show him the house.
Yeah, because why? Why would he probably have a problem with it?
Doesn't want to pay.
Say it again, Hal?
Thrifty, trying to just save as much.
Okay, possibly. Or he's planning on using another agent, and they were just out of town and he wanted to go see a house. I don't want to go show him the house. For me, here's the thing. I just always feel like if somebody is going to be hesitant to sign this, even if it was just for a week, but let's say that they were, and I just said, okay, how about 2 days or 1 day? If they were still hesitant to sign it, they're probably not somebody you're going to get as a client anyway. So anyway, all right. So that's
at that point, you're saying, I'm sorry, I can't show you the house. I mean, like at that, because we can't, right?
yes, yeah. Well,
Like,
and
obviously you're working with someone else, that's
Now-
fine, but like,
yeah, the only caveat to that would be if it is your listing,
okay, yeah.
then you can show that without one of these signed because you're showing it as an agent to the seller. So
Okay.
you're working for your seller.
Okay, so that's the caveat.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. But if they're wanting to go see one that's not your listing, then at that point, I mean, it's up to you to decide what you're gonna do. But for me, I would just say if they're not willing to do it, there's gotta be a reason. And now, I do get the flip side of that though. I do get the other side of it. To some extent, if we use this like dating, to some extent, it's like you're kind of saying to the person, hey, we gotta get married before we can go out on a date to see if we're really a good fit for each other. To some extent, that's what we're doing, is we're asking them to marry us before we've even gone out on a date yet. But that's the new rule. So really, the good news is you just ask them to marry you for a day.
Remember, they got this.
Yeah, just marry me for the day, you get all the perks, and then you're annulled, I guess. I don't know, I'm just kidding. Okay. That joke didn't fly real well, or you didn't want me to. Yeah, I can always count on Gabe when I say that, he'll laugh, a fake one. Okay, so that's the length of it. Next is the properties. So you're gonna check one of two boxes, either located only within, and then you're gonna name the county or counties. And so a lot of times what agents are doing is putting all Utah counties or something like that. So the struggle that we have of if you just put Utah in here, now it's ambiguous, because was it just Utah County or is it Utah counties? See how it's got both here? So if you are gonna just put Utah here, like circle the counties part so that it's clear that it's Utah counties, not just Utah County.
Multiple counties?
Yeah, multiple. So anyway, either put all Utah counties, something like that in there, okay? Or you're gonna check the box here that says located only at. So that's the other side of this, is if somebody's wanting me to show them a property, then I could just say, okay, it's gonna be for today and only this property. Like, kind of, I guess what I'm saying is think of it as like, to begin with, I just want them to sign this and sign it and agree that for the next 3 or 4 months, I'm their agent for any property they buy anywhere in Utah. But it also might be that you have to say, okay, I have to get this signed now. It's a requirement or rule that we get it signed, so let's do it. To me, I guess, this is why I struggle with having a separate showing agreement for me personally, is because if they're not willing to do it for a short time for just this one property, they're trying to tell you something. So, anyway, any questions on that part?
Well, so what would be the difference, I guess I don't understand, because to me, like, what's the difference between a shower's agreement? Is that pretty much like the commission would be different? I don't understand.
Yeah, great,
like,
good question.
because to me that, if you're only signing for one location, that is just a showing agreement essentially.
Yeah.
Like for that one place.
So the difference is the showing agreement ones are, you don't owe them any fiduciary duties, and it
Okay.
specifies that in the showing agreement, no fiduciary duties, and you could put down a dollar amount that they pay you for just like going and showing them houses, which I think some agents will do that. But most of the time, there's a spot that just says you don't pay me anything. So I'm not your agent, I'm just basically opening the door for you, and that's it. So, but I'm with you, I'm like, in essence, you can make this, at least with this, you would create the scenario that you could get paid.
I know,
So,
it's like,
but I'm sure we're gonna have agents that really want one. So, okay, next part here is this, unless checked below, the buyer warrants, and I'm not usually gonna read all this stuff, but there's a few things that I will read to you guys off this, because I wanna make sure you understand it. Because I fully trust that you're all gonna go read this as soon as class is over, right? You're gonna read the whole document?
totally.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna,
So I don't need to read it to you, but I'm going to anyway.
every night before bed.
Yeah, to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, so unless checked below, the buyer warrants that the buyer has not entered into a representation agreement with another brokerage and has no obligation to pay compensation to any other brokerage or company arising out of the acquisition of a property identified in section 1.2. So unless they check this box here, they're acknowledging they have not signed one of these with somebody else. If they have, then you would want to check this box and put in there. So the idea of this section is to have you have a conversation with them of finding out, hey, have you signed this agreement, an agreement with anybody else for specific properties? Because remember up here, it may be that it's just certain properties. So if they have, you would list those here, and those properties would be excluded from this agreement. Does that make sense? Any question?
So what if they had, they were reading the scenario where they like don't wanna sign it with you because said they've signed something with someone else, right? That are trying to like be dishonest. Then they check that, but they put counties, how would that work? Like pretty much you would just say like, have them come look with you, I mean, does that make sense? Like if they put counties rather than like those
Yeah, so-
locations.
Yep, so what you would have to do, so in fact, back to, we had a hearing that we were part of, and I'm not gonna get into that one, because that'll take the whole rest of the class to tell, but what you might like, but on that one, it was a scenario where the people had signed the buyer broker for Tooele County. So that would be an example on this, that you would check the box and say, the buyer does have a representation agreement with another brokerage for the following properties, and they're excluded, and you would write in there Tooele County. So then that would give you access though to show them anywhere outside of Tooele. Yeah, it's gonna be,
It's gonna be really fun, I can.
Yeah, it's gonna be crazy trying to, as we sort through some of this, because that's the problem now. So to go see a house, you have to have signed it. And so initially I can see, this is just me kind of guessing, but I could see initially buyers just signing whatever, but then being trapped now, quote unquote trapped, or in a contract with somebody that they don't want to be working with. And so I could see where down the road buyers may become, I don't think we're gonna have a huge issue getting people to sign initially, but as we get a few that have an issue with it, I worry with this, and maybe I should love the idea of a showing agreement better than, because I already get phone calls from buyers saying, hey, I signed this, but they told me I had to just to see the house, and now I don't wanna work with them, I want out of the contract. I can foresee I'm gonna get a lot more of those type of phone calls, so it's gonna be fun. We'll see what happens. Okay, so that's the section on the terms of the agreement. Any concerns with any of that? Or questions? All right, next then is the brokerage fee. Did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was giving you.
Oh, okay, cool. I just out of the corner of my eye saw your hand go up. Yeah. Okay, so brokerage fee. So this section now is, our old contract just had one paragraph, this now has 3 different paragraphs. So the first paragraph is just the buyer's obligation to pay. So it's saying if during the initial term or any extension of that initial term, which by the way, if whatever the ending date of the contract, coming back to here, if the ending date, if you go under contract on a property and this end date passes, then the contract will extend to when the closing is. So you don't have to actually do an extension. Okay, but the brokerage fee. The buyer's obligation to pay is if during the initial term or any extension of the term that they acquire a property, then they agree to pay you a brokerage fee in the amount of blank dollars and percent. Now, one of the things to point out to you is the way our contract has been was we had the percentage on this side and the dollar amount on this side. So just keep in mind that that's been flopped. So you would, if you were filling this out, you'd put in the 295 and 3% or 4% or whatever, or 495 and 5%, whatever you decide you're gonna do. And the cool thing, the thing I'm most happy about is they've changed this now to be of the gross acquisition price of the property. Used to be that people would try to do net, and which fine, whatever, but now it's just the gross, okay? So that's where you're gonna put in the brokerage fee. And just keep in mind, and I've been trying to get this out of our lingo anyway, there is no admin fee, compliance fee, transaction fee, it's all just the brokerage fee. Okay, so the $295 is just part of the brokerage fee. But a lot of times agents will say admin fee, and there's really no such thing as an admin fee anymore. It's just part of the brokerage fee. Okay, so next section says the satisfaction of the brokerage fee by a third party. So this one, I'm gonna read this one to you too. If a seller's brokerage and or the property owner is compensating the company on a property acquired by the buyer, then the compensation paid to the company by the seller's brokerage and or the property owner shall satisfy the buyer's obligation for the brokerage fee shown above, provided that the compensation is equal to the brokerage fee. The company may not accept total compensation from any source that is greater than the brokerage fee. In the event the compensation paid by the seller's brokerage and or the property owner is less than the brokerage fee, the buyer shall pay any remaining difference at closing. So now, let me explain one of the differences on this. Our old contract before, or our current one we still have up there, says that it has to be at least the amount. And we could have in the past collected more than what it said. So if we had put on there, say 3%, and then the MLS was offering 4, we could get 4. Now what this section 2.2 is saying is that the seller could get, or excuse me, the buyer could get the seller or the brokerage to pay that on behalf of them, but we can't collect more than what is on line 2.1. So if that were to happen, you'd have to go back and do an addendum and change the brokerage fee. Does that make sense? All right, and then 2.3 just says basically that it is due to us when they record, when the closing documents are recorded, or if it's a lease, when the lease is effective, the effective date of the lease, or if it's an option, when the consideration for the option is paid. So that's when we're owed the money. And then the other part of the agreement was that we have to disclose to them that brokerage fees are fully negotiable, they're not set by law, any board, association of realtors, multiple listing service, or any other manner between the company and the broker, the buyer. So, make sense? We did it. Class dismissed, just kidding. Okay, so those are the main differences. The rest of this we'll just kind of go through and talk about, but really not much change to these things. Some minor things, but nothing major. So protection period says if within blank months. What should we put on that line? Okay, 1 month. There's not a right answer is what I'll tell you. So, but it's if within blank number of months after the expiration or termination of this agreement, the buyer goes and buys a property that we had shown them, they would still owe us the commission is basically, or the brokerage fee is what this is saying. So I don't really care what you put in there, just don't put 0 is what I would say. 1, 2, 3, 6, whatever you want to do. But I would recommend not putting 0. Now, here's why. A couple years ago, we had an agent put 0 in there. Their contract expired. The buyer, like a week later, went and bought one of the houses they had shown them. And the agent came to me and was like, hey, we should be owed the commission, right? Nope. Because this protection period says, his said 0. Now, the other thing that is new on here is that it does say unless. So this key word right here is they would still owe us that commission unless the buyer is obligated to pay a brokerage fee on such acquisition to another brokerage based on another buyer-broker agreement entered into after the expiration or termination of this. So if this expired or was terminated and they went and signed with somebody else and then went and saw the house, they wouldn't owe us a brokerage fee. Yep.
So how do you decide like how many months?
It's just kind of up to you. I would just, for me personally, I kind of feel like, and this is just me, so if you want to do differently, I typically do 1 or 2 months because I'm kind of like, if my agreement expired and they bought something in the first month that I had shown them, then I feel like I should be owed a commission. But if they don't, I guess for me, the other side of it is, I'm not going to keep track of it.
So that's what Jason said last week. He's like, I don't want to track them down.
Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about keeping track of it. Now, is it possible that you find out from a neighbor or something, hey, didn't you hear that those people bought the house you showed them or whatever, that, yeah, it might change. But for me personally, I'm not gonna put the effort and energy into worrying about it, so I usually put 1 or 2 months.
Yeah.
So, but just don't put 0 is what I'd say, because we just had an agent that, kind of got the shaft because he put 0.
Yeah.
Well, because there's not always honest people out there. They might see the house, know that your agreement's up next week, and then go find the people.
And in
If
fact,
there is a 0, like, this is just to give you that
protection.
protection
Yeah.
of like, well, I went through the work for 6 months to show
Yep.
you the house, and like,
Yep. And how I explain it when I'm doing this, when I sit down with the buyer, is what I tell them is this section is just to keep honest people honest. That's all it is. And then I use that as the example of, it's just to protect us so that if we went and saw a house on the last day of this, that you couldn't say to the seller, hey, give me a couple days and I'll come write an offer and we will cut the agents out of the deal.
Yeah.
So that's how I always explain it to people. Is that's what this section is saying, is it's just keeping honest people honest.
Yeah.
So, all right, buyer representations and disclosures. This section is just, and I'm gonna pick up the pace because we've been 50 minutes and we're just barely to the end of page 1. So I'll pick up the pace here, but some of that other stuff was important. So buyer representations, just the buyer is warranting that, and this is important, that in all communication with other real estate agents, notify the agents in advance that the buyer's entered into this exclusive buyer broker agreement with the company. So make sure you point that out to your buyers that, hey, by signing this, you are agreeing that any communication you have with another agent, you're gonna tell them you're already signed this with me. And then I usually like to give them a stack of my business cards and just say, in the event you see an open house, in the event you see a model home that you wanna go in, take these cards with you, and when you walk in, if you tell the agent, I've signed a buyer broker, I've signed an agreement with this agent, if you have any questions, call them, they'll leave you alone. And so I use that as saying like, this is how you can go see a model home or go into an open house and the agent's not gonna bug you, is this, because as soon as you tell them that you signed this with me, if they do try to interfere with it, then that's an ethics violation. So just let me know if that happens. And I always tell them as well, when you walk into the model home with this, and hand them my card, don't sign anything. Because sometimes the builder will say, if they sign in, well, they signed in and you weren't with them as the agent, you're not getting paid. So anyway, the good news is some of that's gonna change though, because like I said, once they've signed this agreement.
And say,
know
when
what
doesn't
they're
that
doing.
totally know that at that point, because it was
Somewhat.
the date before?
Yeah, somewhat. And so that's part of the thing, is letting the client know, if you walk in there and they are not that, and builders are gonna be willing to pay us based on builders are always gonna pay based on the market. When they're selling a ton of houses, they aren't excited about paying us a brokerage fee. But when they're not selling a ton of houses, they're more than happy to pay us. And sometimes they'll even offer higher than 3%. So anyway, all right, that's the most important part of that. The other things they're agreeing to here is give us copies of financial information, that they will exercise care and diligence in evaluating a property, and that they will hold us harmless if they get hurt while looking at a property. And then they're also, and this is important to remember, upon signing this, they're also agreeing that they will review and sign the buyer due diligence form and the wire fraud alert disclosure. So just keep that in mind as well. And that they will disclose to us any properties which they have seen already and have an interest in, okay? All right, next section is gonna go through and talk about the agency relationship. And when I'm explaining this to the client, I always just say, this section is saying that I'll be representing you as the buyer's agent. I'm looking out for your best interest. We're on the same side of the table. We're not adversaries. I'm helping you through this process, is what this says. Section 5.2, I always just explain to them what this one is saying is that in the event you end up buying a property that I have listed, that I would then have to be a limited agent, which would mean that I have to stay neutral. That's how I just explain what this is saying to them, that I am more neutral. Section 6 then says that we are trained in the marketing of real estate, that we're not property inspectors, we're not accountants. Like, this section basically is a one paragraph of what our buyer due diligence form says, which we'll get to the buyer due diligence in just a minute. But this professional advice section really is kind of your get out of jail free card. This is the thing that when your client tries to come back and say, you told me that the roof was fine, we are gonna rely on this section of saying, we disclose to you that we're not trained in that, don't rely upon us. So, let's see. Oh, okay, good. Sorry, I got a text that I thought I was supposed to be at a meeting at 12:30, but it's canceled, so that's all good. So we can keep going.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so professional advice. Well, the good news is we can go till 12:30 or 12:40 instead of, before I was gonna be 12:25, like, we're done. So you guys are disappointed, except for Gabe, right? All right, so that's the professional advice. Now, on some of these, if you have questions, let me know. Dispute resolution, okay. This one is a change from our current buyer broker. The current buyer broker just says that we shall go to mediation before going to court. This one now gives the option. My recommendation on this one is that you check shall still. So, in fact, I was debating this morning, and I may still do this, I was debating of going in and checking the shall box and then uploading that into Dotloop so that it's already checked, so that it's already done for you. So, may or may not happen, we'll see. But dispute resolution, that's what that's saying. Now, on the real estate purchase contract, we want to let the client decide because that's between the buyer and the seller as far as the dispute resolution. But for the brokerage, we want it to be shall. We want to go to mediation before going to court.
Yeah,
Because we want to try to figure it out before going to court if we can.
Yeah, why would you want to go to court first?
Yeah. And it's a little different on the real estate purchase contract, meaning like if it were me, if I were the buyer filling out a real estate purchase contract, I'm probably gonna do may. But as the broker of Century 21 Everest, I want you guys to do shall, which is why I say I may go in and actually just check that box and have it checked so that when you go into dot loop, that's the only option you have, so anyway. All right, next section is attorney's fees. This just says, in the event that we do end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable attorney's fees. So that's an important section because if we do end up in court and we win, we want to be able to go after them for our attorney's fees. So, okay. Buyer's authorizations. So this one is they're authorizing us to disclose after closing to the MLS the final terms and sales price of the property acquired by the buyer. Why would we want that? Any ideas?
To be consistent with market data.
Okay, good, for sure. And for sure that's what we want it for. The reason we need their agreement though is because we're a non-disclosure state. So without their permission, we could not disclose it to the MLS. So. And the reason we want it though is what you were saying, Jane. So, all right. The other thing is that they are giving us permission to communicate with them for the purposes of soliciting real estate, and that we could put the earnest money into an interest-bearing trust account. We looked into that a few years ago and decided not to do it, so we currently don't do that, just as an FYI. All right, next is the attachment. This is saying there either are or are not attachments, so if you're gonna have an addendum to the contract, that's what you would use. So to begin with, you're typically probably gonna have there are not additional terms, but it is possible down the road, like I said, that maybe you put 3% on there for the brokerage fee, but then during the negotiations, it ends up being that you can only get the seller to agree to pay 2.5. Then you would do an addendum to this, changing the brokerage fee to $295 and 2.5. Make sense? All right. Equal opportunity just says that we're going to comply with all the federal, state, and local fair housing laws, electronic transmissions and counterparts. And again, just remember, this is how I would be explaining it to the client is, and I'm giving you guys more detail on some of the stuff than I would the client, but most of the rest of this is how I would explain it to the client. So I would be saying electronic transmissions and counterparts, just we're agreeing that we can email this and sign things electronically. And that's how I would just explain it to the client. Due on sale, there are certain types of transactions that would trigger a due on sale. So unless your client is planning on doing a lease option or seller finance, they probably don't have to worry about Section 13, that due on sale clause. But if your client is wanting to do a lease option or seller finance, make sure they understand, because for the buyer, that could really come back to haunt them if they weren't prepared for that, okay? And then Section 14 says that this is the entire agreement, and the key piece of this is, hang on. Yeah, that it's including, for some reason it wants to highlight the sample. So it's the exclusive buyer-broker agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist, wire fraud alert disclosure, and any other additional addenda constitute or contain the entire agreement between the parties. So to some extent, somebody could make an argument that without the buyer due diligence and wire fraud checklist, you don't have a complete contract. So FYI, make sure that when you get this signed, you also get buyer due diligence and wire fraud alert disclosure signed. Okay, so now from there, the buyer's gonna sign it, you're gonna sign it as the authorized agent, and so I'm gonna highlight again to you the importance that you should read through this and make sure you understand it, because by signing it, you're agreeing that you have read it and you understand it, even though you're doing it on behalf of the brokerage. All right, next is the buyer due diligence checklist. So this next form is, and I always like to say this again, for you guys on Zoom. If you did not put your name in the chat box, make sure you do. I always have to do that because inevitably there will be somebody that ends up on Zoom and they come back later when I don't give them CE credit and they're like, hey, I was there on Zoom. So now I like say it 4 or 5 times so that if that happens, I can be like, well, I said it 4 or 5 times, I'm sure. So if you didn't, make sure you do. Okay, next, buyer due diligence checklist. So this next piece is, thanks Manu, see? Appreciate it. Hey, you're probably on the 2nd floor. Why don't you come up here? He's not gonna answer us, I guess. All right.
Oh, on my way.
Oh, look at that.
That's funny.
Yeah, we're almost done now. All right, so buyer due diligence checklist. So this form this is again your get out of, remember I said that one paragraph, section 9 is kind of your get out of jail free card? The buyer due diligence checklist really is your get out of jail free card, because what happens is that we're gonna have the client sign this. In the event the client were to come back and try to sue you or us as the brokerage, we're gonna rely on this form to say, hey, we disclose to you right here in this bold box, whatever, for the notice from the company that we are trained in the marketing of real estate, that we are not professionals in any of this stuff, and that some examples of the things. So the rest of these sections are basically here's some of the stuff you might want to consider. So these are recommendations to your client, not the end all be all. It could be that there's other tests, but these are things you might want to take a look at as the buyer to check it out. Okay, so we list all these things. We're going to have them initial each page. So we're going to have them initial each page. And were you really coming up anywhere, or did you do that just because I gave you a hard time?
No, yeah, because you give me a hard time.
All right, who else is sitting in the office on Zoom that I could give a hard time to get up here? Oh, somebody else threw something in the chat box. What did I miss? Oh, really? Hendrix put it there. Okay, so that's the idea of this buyer due diligence checklist. This is kind of our, hey, these are the kinds of things you should check out. And then when they come back to us and they're upset, we can say, remember that form we had you sign that you acknowledged that you have carefully reviewed this checklist and you understand your right and the recommendation of the company to consult with the appropriate experts and professionals prior to the offer of purchase, okay?
So when you're talking to them, because obviously this has to be signed also, right? Because of
Correct.
that page, you're like, let's chat about that, do you know what I mean? And you're just like, these are some examples, do you know what I mean? Like, so you wanna make sure this is included as you're talking to them, this is just the next.
Yep, and how I do it is when I get to that section 9, when I'm explaining, because remember they're gonna almost always say, just explain to me what I'm signing. When I get to section 9 and it says, we're trained in the marketing of real estate, is when I will go, and we have a separate form here that I need you to sign, that I'm disclosing to you that don't rely on me. There are experts and I'm not it.
So you kind of like put that in number 9, that, hey, here's this one,
Yep.
just to let you know that I'm not an expert in anything else.
Yep.
It's just this.
Yep, and I usually say to them too, since I'm kind of giving you guys some of the language that I use when and up to you if you want to say this or not, but when I get to this form, I always say, this form says don't trust anything I tell you. And then they usually are like, what? And I say, yeah, basically what this form is saying is I'm trained in the marketing of real estate, and when you ask me where the boundary line is, or if the sewer's good, or the this or the that, like, this form says don't trust anything that I tell you. And then, because I joke with them about that, then what happens is when we're out looking at a property, and inevitably they will be like, hey, so do you think that the this or the that? And I go, okay, remember, don't trust anything I tell you. And they go, oh yeah, that's right. So that's kind of how I usually do it. All right, so they're gonna sign that. So you have them initial each page, sign the last page that they have understood all that. Next form in your packet that you have is the receipt and acknowledgement. This is another layer of your get out of jail free card, because we as a company have created our own receipt and acknowledgement form. So we actually are now getting a third thing that we're gonna have them initial and sign, so that if we do end up in court, we can be like, okay, in the buyer broker, you signed that you understood that we're trained in the marketing of real estate. You signed the buyer due diligence that says don't rely on us. Now you also then here initialed, and the reason I like this form, which I didn't create this one, but the reason I like it is because, like, if you come back to this one here and you go to the home inspection, wherever it was at, oh, physical condition right here, like, that's a whole paragraph, and the chances that they're gonna go through and really read all this aren't very good. But when I ask them to initial here, they can look over and go, I hereby acknowledge my right to a home inspection performed by, like, so if they chose not to and they tried to come back and sue us saying, what, I didn't know I could get a home inspection, we got a pretty good, not only do we have that section 9 in the buyer broker, we got section 10 in the due diligence, and then we also have them initialed next to, and that's short enough that it's be like, if they try to say, well, I didn't read it, I'm like, how do you not read that? Like, you could, while you're initialing, you could read it. So, anyway, same thing for home warranty, mold inspections, radon, gas, meth test, electrical, plumbing, foundation inspection, stucco, all the, so we have them initial all of that stuff and then sign here. So that just gives you another layer of protection of, I tried to get you to check this stuff out and you chose not to.
But so at this point, this is before they've even looked at houses.
Correct,
Right?
yeah,
So you're saying like, when we find a house, this is what you are able to do.
yep.
So do we have to have them sign all 4 of these forms before teaching them through the showing first house or?
So you do not have to, this one, so if we go back to the buyer broker, it's just the buyer broker, the due diligence, and the wire fraud. I mean, this does say any additional addenda, but this really isn't an addenda, we have it as a separate form, this receipt and acknowledgement of the buyer due diligence. I mean, it would be good to get it signed, but I would say if you don't, it's fine, you could get this one.
But you do have to have the
But all
other
the
3
other
signed.
ones need to.
You're like on
To
the
get-
doorstep and like, hold on real quick, sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here.
Yeah,
sign here,
unfortunately, that's what it's created.
Initial here,
That's
there.
what this is created, and you can
That's
just
what
blame
this-
the wonderful latest.
You can blame the
Government.
lawsuit on it.
Yeah,
Well,
blame the
it's
lawsuit.
really not the government, this one is it's the jury that said that we,
Just
we're
blame the
guilty.
lawsuit, everyone's heard
Yeah.
about it now,
yeah. Anyway, so yeah,
to protect you and them.
but I would say it's not a bad idea just to get it signed at that point. This one, to some extent, I almost in some ways like the idea of getting these other ones initially and then this one when they write the offer on the property, just because then it's kind of that extra reminder, and it's not even like, oh, well, I signed them all on the same day, then we've got, I told you 2 different times, I had once on this date and then another time I had you initial us on
So
another
would you
date.
do this one like when they wanna make an offer? If
That's what I think,
Better
yeah.
time for that one?
Yeah, I mean, as I say that, I'm like, I mean,
You
at
can
the end of
do
the day,
both,
you have to have it to get paid. We're not gonna give you your check until we have it, so, sooner the better. All right, next, confirmation of earnest money receipt. This form is you're gonna fill it out once you receive the earnest money. So you're just gonna put in the buyer, to your name, the brokerage, seller, seller's agent, seller's brokerage, the property address, and then how you received the earnest money. Was it which I don't know why it's because this isn't our form. I'm like, I don't know why we have direct wire, because we will not accept a wire for earnest money. So just FYI, we will not accept a wire, so don't check that box. You could use earnest, which that's what I recommend, is if somebody's wanting to wire it, just have them use earnest as the way to deposit it, because that can all be done like through an ACH. It's not a wire, but it's an ACH transfer that they can do. So, but anyway, those are the options. Personal check, cashier's check, or I would say check that and put earnest as the other option. We also won't take cash. I had one day, this was years ago, but one day I typically when agents would get a copy of their earnest money, they would take like a picture of the earnest money check and keep it in their file just so they had proof of it. And one day I walked by and an agent was standing there photocopying $100 bills, and I was like, I don't think that's legal to be making photocopies of $100 bills, just FYI. So, anyway, we won't take cash though, and don't take photocopies of it. Okay, so you're gonna fill this out and sign it that you've received the earnest money. Okay? Limited agency consent. When do we use this?
When we're representing both parties.
Okay, so good. If you're representing both the buyer and the seller, when else?
If someone else in the brokerage is representing the other.
Perfect. If somebody else within Century 21 Everest is represented. Now, there are a couple of other Century 21 franchises, like there's one in Provo. You would not need this if they're with Century 21 Harmon. There was one, I don't know if it's still around, up in Ogden too, that was, can't remember what it's called, but anyway, so if it's not Century 21 Everest, you don't need this. If it is Century 21 Everest that's on the other side of the transaction, you need to fill this out. The other thing, so you'll put in buyers and the agent representing each, then you're gonna check, have everybody initial, check the box, either one agent, so if it's you representing both, or two agents within the brokerage, you'll check that one, put each of their name, both buyer and seller sign, and then only one agent has to sign them. So let's say that it was Manu and Jaden, you guys were doing a deal together, only one of you has to sign this. Occasionally, people will send it to me to sign, which that's fine, you can do that if you want, but you guys are authorized to do it. So just always pay attention, which FYI, that was one of the other things that they said that Aubrey had violated in our code of ethics that we were talking about at the start of class, was notice here that it says signature of authorized agent or broker, so you can sign it. Some of the forms, if it says principal broker or branch broker, then you need to get one of the brokers to sign it. And on one of the other complaints they had against Aubrey that he was claiming to be a broker because he had signed a form where it said principal or branch broker and he had signed it. So they were trying to say, yeah, see, he was misrepresenting himself. But the funny thing is, to go back to the hearing, in the middle of the hearing, the agent who filed the complaint said multiple times, yeah, he's gonna be a great agent, he's gonna be a great agent. And the panel was like, so are you a new agent? And he said, yeah, I'm pretty new. And I'm like, so if he knew that he was a new agent, then he had to know he wasn't a broker, because, so even though he signed this, he didn't misrepresent. Like, it's not like he would have believed it. Anyway, total side note. So anyway, we won, is the good news. All right, next form is the wire fraud alert, which we just talked about. It has to be signed as part of our buyer broker. And you'll notice on here that it's got a spot for Century 21 Everest. Your name is the agent, and then the client, the buyer or the seller, is gonna fill this out. And basically, now on the seller side, I'm not as concerned about, have the seller sign this, yes, but I'm not as concerned about a seller being trapped by wire fraud. That's less likely to happen. But your buyer, you need to make sure you take time to explain to your buyer on this wire fraud alert disclosure, like, do not send a wire unless you 100% know it's going to the right spot. Because what's gonna happen if they send a wire and somebody sends them an email, fraudster, that says, hey, our wire instructions have changed, wire your down payment to this instead now, and they wire it. What's gonna happen?
Gone.
Yeah, you're not getting paid. That's the side note. The truth is, their money's gone and they're now out of the money, but you're not getting paid either, probably, because the deal's gonna fall apart because now they don't have money, unless they happen to have money, but. Anyway, so just really make sure of that. Now, I actually sold a house in Mississippi that I owned that it's a long story, but to sell the house, I had to wire in some money to get the house sold. And when I went up to the bank up the street here to send the wire, like, thankfully this happens. The bank was like, they were like, have you 100% verified this is where the money, that this is where it's supposed to be going? I said, yes. And they were like, you're sure? Yes. Like, they, kind of almost like our due diligence and that receipt and acknowledgement, like they were having me acknowledge over and over and over again, like, you are confident you know where this money is being wired. Like, to the point that I started to be like, I don't know if I really do or not. Like, even though I talk about this form all the time and I worry about it, I was like, I probably better call one more time just to make sure that I'm not wiring this money somewhere else. I didn't really, because I knew, but I was like, I could see where a consumer could be to the point of like, which I think that's a good thing. And then even once I wired it, then their wire department called me before we send this, we just need to verify that you're 100% sure this money is going where you think it's going to. And I was like, I appreciate you guys doing this, yes. But like I said, it was one of those things. So like, it would probably be good to tell the client, like, don't wait till the last minute to go wire money if you're gonna wire it into the title company, because it could get delayed by your bank just because they wanna verify, because once it's gone, it's gone. So anyway, we did actually have one that was an agent that used to be with our brokerage. She left our brokerage. After she left our brokerage, she was buying a house she was gonna flip, and she was using the title company up on the 4th floor. And she wired $150,000, but she had gotten an email saying wire it to this other place. So she wired it, but then luckily somehow the title company realized, and so the wire had been sent, but luckily it was still in transit, meaning the bank on the other end hadn't approved it to receive the money. And the title company was able to get a hold of them before they did and said, stop, don't do that, it's the wrong person. And otherwise, $150,000 would have been gone. Ooh, talk about a bad day. So, have I beat that one up enough to the importance of make sure your clients know, don't, like I almost even, when I'm meeting with the client, I'm like, get in your car, drive to the place you're gonna send the wire, and walk in and be like, you really sent this, I mean, you don't have to be that, but almost to that point of like, make 100% sure. So don't call phone numbers off of emails that you get, like actually call the people, which that is what I did before I sent the money to Mississippi. Was I did go on and just Googled, found the title company, called and just said, hey, I just want to make sure these are the right instructions. They said, yep, okay. And then like I said, then I went up to the bank and the bank was like, are you sure? Yes. But almost to the point that I was like, I'm not sure, I don't know.
Am I
Like,
sure?
yeah, they're like, can you come in this room? And they put a bright light on you. Are you where were you on Friday night? And, just kidding.
You're like, I don't know if I'm sure anymore.
Yeah, I don't know, I was, but I don't know if I am anymore. Okay, affiliated business arrangement disclosure. We need to update this form actually now, but this one is just saying that we have a sister relationship with Inspiro Financial and North Star Title. And so you're having your client, this is a RESPA required form, so they're signing this acknowledging that we would love for them to use Inspiro and North Star, but that they don't have to. Okay? And then they're gonna sign it. All right, disclosure acknowledgement regarding lead-based paint. When do we need this form?
Anything built before 1978.
So if it was built in 1978, do I need it? No, you do not need it. So prior to 1978, you need it, okay? So you're gonna put in the address of the property. You guys hopefully talked about the seller side with Jason last week. You're gonna go through the buyer side. You're gonna give them any of the copies from above. Make sure you send to them this protect your family from lead in your home, which I would recommend share that with them through .loop, because then we have proof that you sent it to them. Then they're going to initial either CI or CII. So they're gonna do either one or two here. If they initial this one, they're just saying they're gonna take a 10-day opportunity, and we will then require that you give to us the lead-based paint addendum. So this is the lead-based paint disclosure, but if your client initials this box or checks this box, or initial, I guess, if they initial that box, the staff is gonna say, you need the lead-based paint addendum as well, okay? If they initial this box, then they're saying that they've waived the opportunity to test for lead-based paint, so we won't need the addendum, okay? So just keep in mind, the disclosure is required if the property was built in 1978. The addendum is only required if they initial this box. Occasionally, we will see people that'll have their client initial both. If that happens, we're gonna say, our assumption is that you are taking the 10-day opportunity, so we need the addendum. So you'd have to do an addendum to this disclosure, fix it.
Do a lot of people use those 10 days here?
No.
I mean, most of these
Very rare.
homes are been,
Yeah, very rare that people do that. Not as rare that somebody will initial it, that we then therefore say we need the addendum. Yeah, but they weren't planning to do it. Well, they initialed it, so we need the addendum. Alright, last thing that we've got here is how you get paid. This is the most important form we're gonna talk about today, right? Actually, we started with the most important and end with the most important. The buyer broker was how much you're gonna get paid, this is how you get paid. Alright, so how do you fill this out? You're gonna go through and put in the address of the property, put the buyer's name, the seller's name, whatever title company you're working with. Now, the next thing is the transaction type. So any of these boxes that are whatever color that looks like on your screen, it's tan on mine, but what does it look like? Does it look-
Pink on
It's
here.
like pink.
It's pink on your, yeah, whatever color it is on yours. Those are gonna be drop-down boxes that are clickable. So this is gonna be a form you'll fill out in Excel. And so you'll have a click that you could, so what I'm saying is, you're not gonna find this form on .loop because .loop is only PDFs and you have to fill this out in Microsoft Excel, okay? So you're gonna fill it out in Excel. This is a drop-down box where you will select either residential, commercial, lease, whatever it is, okay? Next, you're gonna put in whatever the purchase price of the property was. Gross, net, or a flat amount, which like I said, now everything's gonna be gross, but it still would be possible that you did a flat amount, so that's a clickable box that you could change it, but default is gross. The commission percentage, whatever it is that you put as your commission, you're gonna put in there. Are you paying a referral to an outside commission or a company outside of ours? If you are, you'll click that and put yes, and then it'll open up a box over here that you would type in who that referral fee is going to. If you're not, just leave it at none. If you've done a commission advance, you would check yes, come over and have to fill out who the commission advance company is, which commission advances are like payday loans, crazy interest rates, so don't do it, is what I'm saying, but people still do. So in the event you did, that's how you do it. The Century 21 admin fee collected, which I probably need to change that to, because I just told you guys we can't call it admin fee and now we're calling it an admin fee. So how much did you collect? So you're gonna put in there how much you collected of that. So if it was $295, great. If you were charging a $495, put $495 in here, $595, $695, whatever it is you're collecting, put that in there. Earnest money that's held by Everest, so you'll only put in the earnest money here if we are holding it. If we're not holding it, you'll just leave it as zero. So if it's a title or another brokerage, just leave it at zero. Agent credits given at title, if for some reason to get a deal done, you were sitting there and you had to give up $100 or something, then you would put that in here. This then is gonna give us the amount that we will get from the title company. So what the amount the title check will be. Which, let me come back up to earnest money real quick, just so that you guys can understand in case you don't. The earnest money that we hold here will end up being part of the commission. So rather than us send earnest money to the title company and then them send us the commission check, what will happen is that's why we have to ask how much we're holding at Everest. So let's just say that it was $1,000 put in on this box, then the title check coming, instead of being $9,295, would have been $8,295, because then we transfer it from the trust account to our operating account to pay you your commission. Okay, so if you ever look at it and you're like, wait, how come the check coming from title is less than what I anticipated? It's probably because we're already holding the extra money you were thinking about as earnest money, okay? So the next thing down here is if you're a single agent, you'll just leave that there. You'll put in your name here. If you're on a team, you'll click the box here and put team, and then it'll open up a box over here that you would fill in who the team leader is and how much the split is going to them, okay? And then you'll put your name right down here. Then it's gonna deduct the admin fee of $295. So if for some reason you didn't collect this fee, you would put zero here, but we're still gonna deduct it from the commission, so you're gonna pay it, is kind of what that means, okay? So then that's gonna figure out what your agent base amount is, and then from there, you're gonna put in what split you're on. So in this case, this would be if you were on a 70-30 split, you're gonna put in how much is going to the company right there. So if you're on a 70-30, you'd put 30 in here. Then it's gonna deduct out the franchise fee. If you pay the admin fee, it's gonna put that in right there. So like I said, if this had zero up here, it would put in automatically $295 right there. If you want to contribute to the Century 21 Foundation, our recommendation is $21 from every closing, but you can adjust it to whatever you want on the foundation. And then if you're using a transaction coordinator, their fee goes in here. But if you're using a transaction coordinator, you should not be filling this out, just FYI. If you're using a transaction coordinator, they'll fill this out. So that's one of the advantages of using a transaction coordinator is you won't have to fill this out. They will do it, okay? And then the name of the transaction coordinator goes there, and then this is what your net check amount will be. And then there's a drop-down box for, do you want it direct deposited, yes or no? So, questions? All right, well, thank you all for being on here. And so Thursday's class is gonna be the CMA class. So what we're gonna do on Thursday is I'm gonna take a property and we're gonna do a CMA on it. So I'm gonna teach you how to do a CMA by us just doing a CMA is what we'll do on Thursday's class, so. Sound good? Okay, thanks everyone for being here. If you can be here in person, for sure on the very last class, yeah, I can always count on Dave to stand up and, he always gives me a standing ovation. Awesome. Anyway, if you guys can be here, it's just cause it's more fun for me, but for sure the last class when we get to the laws one, which Jason's gonna be doing that one. If you can be here in person, do it because it's so much more fun, because we're gonna play a game as the last class. The whole class is a game, basically. And it's hard if people are on Zoom, so I understand if you have to be on Zoom, fine. But if you can be here in person. Sound good?
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks guys. Have a great rest of your day and we'll see you on Thursday and we'll do the CMA.
Thank you.
See ya.
That was so fun, dude.
Was it?
Exciting.
So exciting.
Thank you, Russ.
See ya.
Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome.